So in chapter 21, we begin to discuss employment discrimination, and the chapter begins with the employment at will doctrine, which basically is a doctrine that states that either the employer or the employee could terminate that employer-employee relation at any time for any reason. The National Labor Relations Act has reduced the number of employees covered by that particular employment at will doctrine because the act gives employees the right to enter into collective bargaining, which we have talked about in previous chapters, especially as it related to the formation of unions and the bringing of unions into particular businesses. The chapter continues by discussing the constitutional provisions, which there are three constitutional provisions that anti-discrimination laws can be traced back to. The Fifth Amendment, in which no person may be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process. The 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery. And the 14th Amendment, which granted former slaves all the rights and privileges of citizenship and guaranteed the equal protection of the law to all persons. Though these provisions were not enough, Congress needed to enact major legislation to reduce discrimination, and that legislation is in regards to the civil rights laws and anti-discrimination laws. And one of the things that I have found most interesting as I have been returning to school and taking various history classes and business classes, I really find the link between what you have learned in one area, such as history, and learning about all of these situations within our U.S. history and when those things were brought about and how they intertwine interestingly with other courses such as business law. So just a little side, I find that very interesting. And it also interests me very greatly in how, things that say the Civil Rights Act, which the first one began in 1866, when you think about how long ago that was, but it's something that is still affecting us today. When we talk about the Equal Pay Act of 1963 and, where the US was at that time and in business where the US was at that time. And now, this many years later, while there has been certainly a reduction in that gap between, say, males and females, in regards to equal pay, there is still, a bit of a gap, some would believe, and, we're still having some of those situations. So here we are in 2019, and we're still seeing the kind of repercussions or the effect that these types of situations and laws that we are reading about, bring to business even today. So I find that, link very interesting. The chapter does talk about Title VII, which prohibits employers from hiring, firing, and otherwise discriminating in terms and conditions of employment. And it also talks about not being able to segregate employees on a basis of their protected classes, whether that class is, of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. And Title VII is a bit new to me. I have always worked in small business, and so many of the situations that we have read of recently don't necessarily apply directly to the business size that I have as far as employees are concerned. And the so we are not covered by Title VII. So while I have, I guess, read about some of these things mostly in the news and maybe through, heard about some of them through my husband, because he works for a much larger company that would fall under Title VII. A lot of these things, as far as Title VII are concerned, were very new to me. So I found a lot of this, a lot of the reading that we did very interesting. Again, really a plethora of information to take in and absorb and understand. Um, Utilizing this going forward, certainly, I try as the director of a program to be sure that I am, following the laws and operating within those laws. And while there may be things that don't necessarily apply in our situation, it doesn't necessarily mean that I would eliminate those um, as things that we should incorporate. So some of this information that we read, I certainly do find valuable. Um, One of the things that has kind of been brought to light for me recently, in light of some current events, I think our insurance company has required that we come up with an anti-bullying policy for our center. And I've been doing a lot of research about that and trying to create such a policy that can be implemented. And so, when we were reading about things such as harassment and those types of things, it really kind of provided a little bit of a link for me because, it's sort of new territory, the whole anti-bullying thing, but it it certainly could fall under a harassment type situation, depending on exactly, what the bullying situation was. Um, and so, I think it just kind of goes to show that you just never know where those little pieces are going to fit in place. Another area that, we have read about was, and we read about this earlier in regards to like the Family Medical Leave Act. So as a small business, that's not something that is applicable in our situation, but it's also something that we try our best to follow as well. We're trying to create a kind of family feeling to our business and keep a family type environment. And how family friendly are you if when people are having family situations, whether it's, a health situation or maybe an educational situation that needs to be dealt with, when they're in need of that support that would come and protect them through the FMLA if they were in a larger company. um, we try to implement that for our employees as well. So, this chapter really talks a lot about various things from, the protected classes, which obviously, we would want to protect all individuals that work for us, regardless of race, color, nationality, all of those sorts of things. And also, when it talks about age discrimination and, how that all ties in. And that's actually an area that I sort of became a bit familiar, sadly, with in regards to my father. Many years ago, he had worked, dedicated his whole life to a particular firm. And I do believe, though he would never pursue it or do anything about it, that ultimately he was asked to resign or retire, I guess, really at the time. But I really think that it was all about age. And I think, he had much life left to live and much left to give. And I think that it's very unfortunate that, as I think a country as a whole, we don't care for our elderly. And he wasn't even that old at the time. I'm feeling like I'm quickly approaching where he was, and I'm certainly not feeling like I want to be put out to pasture anytime soon. So, really making decisions that, again, like that are ethical. We've talked about that previously, and I think it's just so true. It just rings so true through all of these types of situations. In chapter 22, we really focus on the environment and environmental law and protecting the environment. And again, this is an area that is now such a hot topic. What are the things that we're doing, the advances that we're making or have made that we're now sort of second guessing or um, regretting, and looking for alternative energy sources, say, and all of the various agencies that are in charge of protecting our environment and looking out for our interests. For example, the regulating water quality. Can you imagine if we didn't have an organization that was guarding our, sacred water supplies, especially in the public sector, making sure that the water that we are drinking is safe to drink. So again, these are all things that while they were enacted many years ago, they're still affecting us every single day. For those of us who, you know, are not unwell, which I fortunately am at home, but at work, where we use public water. And so, all of these types of things are something that affects us every day. As a business, are you making decisions that are in the best interests of the environment? Are you making sure that any chemicals that are being discharged from your business are, being done so in an appropriate manner? Um, so this is where all of that all this information really comes very much into play as far as business law is concerned, and making sure that if we're in those positions, that we are ensuring that our business is following the laws and is, thinking about what is in the best interest of our environment.